about upcoming events that we have. And also, please look at the Parent Resource Center website for upcoming summer camp list. So for some activities and things you can do for your child over the summer. At this time, I'll turn it over to our presenters to introduce themselves.
Good morning. I'm Kelly Henderson with Formed Families Forward. I'll be speaking with you a little bit later, but I will share some slides. Megan, do you want to introduce yourself while I get my slides up?
Sure. My name is Megan Souza. I'm the Youth and Young Adult Program Coordinator at Nami, Northern Virginia, which is the local affiliate of the National Alliance on Mental Illness.
So I want to just give a shout out to that summer camp directory that Rhonda spoke to. It is fabulous and one of our go-to resources that we often share with families that we serve. So thank you for making that such a valuable resource, Rhonda. So again, I'm Kelly Henderson with Formed Families Forward. I'm going to talk to you a little bit later about what we do. We are a family-led organization in the area. And then Megan is going to take over pretty quick, but we wanted to just recognize for a moment the reality that this week brings us to. We wanted to recognize the mass shooting tragedies in the last several weeks. Unfortunately, so many multiple tragedies, including the one this week with the loss of life in Uvalde, Texas. Such tragedies, including those in which victims are children in schools, really weigh heavily in our hearts and our minds. So we wanted to give some space this morning and allow folks to hold close those parents, caregivers, siblings, educators, and all in the communities that are impacted. And because we are addressing mental health today, specifically, I wanted to offer this from Nami, which is the parent organization of Northern Virginia, Nami, that Megan represents. So they issued a statement on May 25th, and I just want to share a couple sentences from that because I think it does position us well for our conversation today. Mental illness is not the problem. It is incorrect and harmful to link mental illness and gun violence, which is often the case following a mass shooting. Pointing to mental illness doesn't get us closer as a nation to solving the problem, and doing so leads to discrimination and stigma against those with mental illness, who are more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators. People across the globe live with mental illness, but only in the US do we have an epidemic of senseless and tragic mass shootings. So Megan and I want to invite you into a moment of silent reflection now. We recognize that our thoughts and prayers for those impacted must be accompanied by advocacy, policy change, and of course, opportunities for healing. We'll take a moment now. Thank you for sharing that with us. Megan is going to, I think, take over for a bit, and I will see you soon.
Thanks, Kelly. 1 second to pull up my slides. All right. As I mentioned, my name is Megan Souza. I'm the Youth and Young Adult Program Coordinator at Nami, Northern Virginia. I take on a lot of other roles, though, not just focused on youth and young adults, some things like outreach, presentations, some of our advocacy work, a lot of other things as happens with a nonprofit. But today I'm going to share just some of the basics around mental health. As Kelly mentioned, mental health is such an important topic right now. It is Mental Health Awareness Month, but this is an important topic every month of the year. So I'm glad that we can talk today. I do want to give a disclaimer. My background is in child and adolescent psychology, but I am not a psychologist or social worker. I'm a program coordinator, but also I'm going to share a little bit of my personal experience with mental health as well. This is just a quick overview of what I'm going to touch on today, just so that you guys get an idea. And I know Kelly will jump in after with some more information. I always give a content warning before my presentations. We do discuss several topics that can be difficult to hear sometimes, things like lived experience with mental health conditions, suicide, and trauma. Kelly is going to talk a little bit more about trauma, but if at any point you need to step away, take care of yourself, please do so. So what is mental health? Well, we all have mental health, just like we all have physical health, and it can impact all aspects of our life, from work to relationships. And it's really our ability to enjoy life and feel good. But not only that, it's really our ability to cope with everyday stressful situations and difficulties that we face in our life. So we're going to talk a little bit about mental health conditions. I'm going to start with some facts, some statistics. So maybe you've heard these before, but about 1 in 5 adults and 1 in 6 youth, age 6 to 17, experience a mental health condition each year. About 50% of the lifetime mental health conditions begin by age 14 and about 75% by age 24. So often they begin in adolescence or young adulthood. But only about 50% of the people that live with a mental health condition actually receive treatment. And there's a couple reasons for this, but sort of the two main ones that we highlight at Nami are stigma, so that initial, stigma that prevents people from reaching out for support, maybe fearing discrimination or not believing that they really need that support, and access to care. We know access is a huge issue, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. So I always share this statistic because it's astonishing to me still, but the average delay between onset of mental health symptoms and treatment is 11 years. A lot can happen in 11 years. And we know that if people don't receive treatment, there can be consequences. Things that can include suicide, incarceration, homelessness, and even physical health issues. As you can see, about 37% of people incarcerated in state and federal prisons have a diagnosable mental health condition. And chances are they're not receiving treatment while they're incarcerated. And about 21% of people experiencing homelessness have a serious mental health condition. That just goes to show that when you don't get treatment, these could be some of the consequences. And we can't talk about mental health without touching on the pandemic. We know that the pandemic had a serious impact on the mental health of our community. So during the pandemic, sort of since the start, about 1 in 3 adults have reported experiencing symptoms of anxiety or depression. A recent survey found that about 1 in 5 adults and 1 in 5 young people reported that the pandemic had a serious negative impact on their mental health. So we know that it's making a difference. And we also know that this impact is going to last beyond the pandemic. It's not something that will simply go away, but people are going to still experience these negative impacts to their mental health. So I mentioned access. This is one of the biggest challenges in the mental health world right now, is access to treatment is not easy. In 2020, less than half of US adults living with a mental health condition received treatment. And when seeking treatment, there's a few big factors that I want to point out. Insurance coverage is huge, and provider shortages are two of the big ones, not the only ones, but they're two big barriers. So in 2020, about 11% of adults with a mental health condition had no insurance coverage, none whatsoever. And that doesn't include people who are on Medicaid, who maybe can't find a provider that accepts Medicaid, or even private insurance, and their insurance doesn't cover mental health care. And over half of US counties do not have a single practicing psychiatrist. Provider shortage is a huge issue right now, especially with the pandemic that caused a lot of burnout. You may have heard that in the state of Virginia, back in July of 2021, 5 out of 8 of the state mental health hospitals had to close to new admissions due to staffing shortages. And this is a really big deal because there were a lot of people that could no longer get access to those beds. So it's something that certainly needs to be worked on, and it's something that is typically causing people to be on those long wait lists and have delays in getting access to care. People living with mental health conditions aren't the only ones impacted. We know that caregivers are very important, play a very important role in those lives. At least 8.4 million Americans provide care to an adult with an emotional or mental health condition, and they spend an average of 32 hours per week providing unpaid care. That's a lot, and that can easily lead to things like burnout, stress of their own physical and mental health challenges. So caregivers are also an important piece of this conversation. So what exactly are mental health conditions? I know we talked about mental health, but one of the things at NAMI that we really like to do is we like to view mental health conditions as medical conditions like physical illness. Again, they impact all aspects of our lives. They impact the way we think, feel, and act. They impact our work, our relationships, our school, and they can make a big difference on our ability to function in day-to-day life. They can happen to anyone, and they're not necessarily anyone's fault. Sometimes they're caused by some sort of combination of genetic and environmental factors. We still don't know all the details of the causes because there's still a lot of research being done, but it's something that happens to people. So I want to talk about general warning signs. One of the things I emphasize with this presentation is you are not supposed to leave here being able to diagnose somebody with a mental health condition. That's not your job. That's not my job either. That's a job for a mental health provider. But if you recognize these warning signs, you can encourage somebody, or maybe if you see these in yourself, you can reach out and get the help they need early. So one of the things I like to mention is a lot of these signs are something that we've all experienced at one point or another. We all feel sad, we all feel tired, we all feel stressed or even anxious at times. But we like to look at frequency. So how often is this happening? Duration, how long has this been going on for? And severity, how much is it impacting my everyday life? So when I first started experiencing mental health symptoms in high school, I felt this overwhelming sadness, and I didn't really have a reason for feeling sad. I wasn't sure why I was feeling sad, and it got to the point that I was in my room crying for days on end, and get to the point of not wanting to get out of bed, not wanting to spend time with my friends, and those were signs that something else was going on. That duration piece, we typically say 2 weeks. That's going to look a little bit different if somebody has had a loss of a loved one or something else, because that grieving period is typically longer than 2 weeks. So. If we're looking for warning signs in somebody else, we obviously can't know what's going inside someone's head unless they tell us. But often there are behavioral changes and things that we can see from the outside that can, signal that something might be going on. One of the biggest things that I recommend people look for is drastic changes in mood, personality, behavior, sleeping habits. Those are big signs. So for me in high school, I was a very social person. So suddenly not spending time with friends, that was a very concerning sign for me, because that was a big change from my typical behavior. I'll also add that in adolescence, sometimes the sadness or anxiety can come across as irritability, which can be difficult to detect because sometimes teens are irritable for typical reasons as well. But it can also come across in difficulty in school, withdrawal from friends. Those are some big ones as well. And young children may often experience somatic symptoms or physical symptoms, things like stomach aches or headaches, not wanting to go to school because they don't feel well. And they may also show irritability or anger because they have a harder time expressing their emotions. Those are certainly things adults can do as well, but they are a little bit more common among younger children. So we can't talk about mental health without talking about suicide. One of the things that we emphasize is not everyone exhibits warning signs when they're thinking about harming themselves. But typically there are signs, sometimes they're subtle. We really try to remind people, trust your instinct. Again, it's if somebody is not acting themselves, that might mean that something's off. Some of the biggest signs that somebody's thinking about suicide is severe withdrawal from loved ones, maybe language like, I don't want to be a burden, you would be better off without me. Things like that are concerning to hear. And if somebody is self-harming, that could be a sign that they might also be thinking about taking their own life as well. If you notice these warning signs, it's really important to say something immediately. For me, when I was in my first year of college, I had made some friends. I had started to spend time with people. I started out really well, and as my mental health got worse, I stopped taking my mom's phone calls. I said, no, I don't want to burden you with my problems. I didn't talk to any of my friends about it. I stayed in my room. And that ended up leading to me wanting to take my own life at the time. And fortunately, I had people who were able to recognize something was going on and pull me out of it. So if somebody is exhibiting warning signs of suicide, it's important to take action immediately. One of the easiest things you can do is asking the question, are you thinking about suicide? Sometimes there's this idea that that's going to put the idea of suicide into their head. Chances are they've already thought about it. Maybe they don't have a plan, but it's probably crossed their mind if they are struggling. But one thing is asking that question can actually let people know that you see them, you're concerned about them, and that you care enough to check in. So it may actually be able to help and start a conversation. If they say yes to that question, or if there is indication that they are thinking about suicide, really important not to leave them alone unless you are personally unsafe being there. Really important to remain calm and same thing as any crisis, be as patient as possible. You can call a few different numbers. You can call, if they have a mental health provider, call that. If you are not their main caregiver, you can call their caregiver. If it's a parent, a guardian, a sibling, you could call the suicide prevention line. And if there's an immediate risk of harm, the best thing to do is call 911. And I recommend asking for a CIT trained officer. I don't know much about CIT in Prince William County, but most of the counties, if you ask for a CIT trained officer, they can hopefully send you one. And CIT is a 40-hour training for law enforcement that focuses on behavioral health crises, so they learn how to respond to those situations. I'll also point out that 988, the 3-digit number for behavioral health crises, goes live in July. So starting July 16th, you can call 988 for behavioral health crises, and they will connect you to the most appropriate resources depending on the situation. So I'm going to give a very brief introduction to trauma because I know Kelly's going to go into this a lot, but this is a word that we have heard so much recently and it's so relevant right now. So I just want to touch on what it is. So trauma is really an emotional response to negative events, things like natural disaster, assault, and accident. Any event can be considered a trauma if it's a negative event that has an emotional impact. So it's really more about the emotional impact of the event than what the event is itself. Trauma is common. About 60% of men and 50% of women will experience a traumatic event in their lifetime. Many of these people, actually most of these people, will probably experience an acute negative response, so a short period of time where they'll have a negative response that will eventually go away. But a smaller number of people will have a long-term response, a long-term impact of that negative event. And I always emphasize that trauma doesn't have to be direct exposure. If you witness something like violence, that is considered trauma in addition to experiencing violence. And I'm going to pause there so that Kelly could jump in later. I'm not going to go too much more into trauma because I know she has a lot more to share. But I want to talk about how do we support our mental health? We know that there are all these challenges. So what do we do about it? So we know there's treatment available. We know there's treatment that is evidence-based. It's been researched. Finding treatment is not always easy, and sometimes it takes some time to find what works for you. But when you do, it makes a huge difference. Treatment could sometimes involve more than one type. Maybe it's a combination of therapy and medication. Maybe it's therapy and coping strategies. it looks different for every person. Typically what we think of as treatment is talk therapy, psychotherapy. And I listed a couple types. I'm not going to go into too many details about those, but that's typically what we think of. But there are so many other types of treatment available as well. There's a lot of new types of treatment coming out, different alternative methods like art therapy, animal therapy, brain stimulation treatments. There's a lot of different things coming out. So, it's not just talk therapy or medication. And peer support is something I'll talk a little bit about later, because this is what Nami does. But peer support is also a growing area of support that's been shown to be really helpful for people living with mental health conditions. Finding treatment is not always easy, as I mentioned. If you have insurance, the best recommendation I can make is to go through your insurance company. Most insurance companies will have some sort of directory of the doctors that take their insurance, and you can find, if you know what you're looking for, you can find it through that. If you don't really know where to start, a really great place to start is talking to your primary care physician, and they can talk to you about some of the options that are available. So taking care of our mental health is not only about receiving professional treatment. We know that mental health and physical health are so closely related. I mentioned somatic symptoms. When I was in high school, one of the first symptoms I had was somatic. I had stomach issues that I couldn't figure out what was causing them. And I later realized that it was stress. So taking care of our physical health is a really important piece of taking care of our mental health. I know when the pandemic started, my main form of exercise was a very social activity with other people, and therefore I could no longer do that. And I had to find other ways to keep my body moving, because I knew that exercise had a big impact on my mental health and made me feel good. Eating well, getting enough sleep. I mean, how many of us have felt grumpy, irritable when we haven't eaten or haven't gotten sleep? We know that connection, and we know that taking care of our physical health and mental health tie in really closely. Coping strategies are another thing that are really important in somebody's recovery. They're important for everyone. Everyone uses coping strategies to take care of stress, whether you realize it or not. It's all about things that make us feel good, whether it's some sort of hobby, sports. Hiking is something that I love to do. I love getting outside in nature, but also the exercise is really great. Listening to music when we're stressed. Some people journal. It's really about finding what works for you. And there are a lot of different things that can be considered positive coping strategies. There are negative coping strategies too that don't actually help, but may make problems worse. But these are just some of the positive ones. These are especially important for people with mental health conditions, but we do all use these. A few more. I want to mention that one of the things that I had to face when I first was diagnosed with a mental health condition was I had to try new coping strategies, because I learned that what I was doing to take care of my mental health wasn't enough for what I needed. So I had to find some new ways to take care of my mental health. For me, mindfulness was something that I discovered. For some people, it's making sure you have a routine. That can be really, really helpful. Again, this looks different for every single person, and some things work for some people and some work for others. But it can be a bit of a trial and error to find what can make you feel good. I always like to share these two exercises. These are things that I use when I'm feeling very overwhelmed. And the nice thing is you can do this yourself, or you can do this with a loved one who might be feeling overwhelmed. If I am in the middle of a panic attack, I cannot talk about what's going on. I can't talk about my anxious thoughts, because I'm focusing on trying to get out of the fight or flight or freeze feeling that I'm experiencing. So these types of exercises help ground you and bring you to the present moment, so then you can take more steps to take care of yourself. So box breathing is really simple. It is breathing in for 4 counts, holding for 4 counts, breathing out for 4 counts, and holding for 4 counts. Very simple breathing technique. There's a ton of other breathing techniques, but this allows me to focus on my breathing and not on my anxious thoughts. And the 5 senses exercise is my absolute favorite because I called my mom one day in the middle of a panic attack, and I was crying and I couldn't get words out. And she said, "Megan, hang on. I need you to name 5 things that you can see." And I was like, okay. And I started to do it. And as I'm using my senses again, I'm realizing I'm becoming more grounded. The anxious thoughts are not as present in my mind. So it's, again, a great exercise you could do yourself. You do it with a loved one. And that's just one of many. So I want to talk a little bit more about supporting a loved one, because for many of us, maybe we don't struggle with our mental health, but we have a loved one who does. So if you suspect that somebody you know, somebody you care about is having a hard time with their mental health, what can you do about it? Recognizing those warning signs is really key, and you can express and mention specific behaviors or things that you've seen that concern you. It makes that conversation a little bit easier than, "Hey, I'm worried about you," and leaving it there. Asking open-ended questions is really important too. If I say, "Are you okay?" it's very easy for somebody to say, "Yeah, I'm fine," and move on. If I ask a question like, "Hey, tell me how you're feeling today," or "How was school?" Something broader. They still may come across with the "I'm fine" answer, but it leaves a little bit more room for them to have space to share. Being patient and validating is really important. I think naturally some of our instinct is to, somebody comes to us with a problem, we want to give advice, we want to fix it. Or if somebody is sad, we want to say, "Oh, well, look at the bright side. Look at all these great things that you have." But sometimes people just really need the validation that, "Wow, that's really difficult. I'm sorry that you're feeling that way." Sometimes giving advice, trying to fix it or look on the bright side can come across as, "You shouldn't be feeling this way," which can be really hard to hear. And I also want to emphasize that some people may not be ready to accept help. You cannot force someone to get help. It's about being patient and letting them know that you're there for them. Maybe you have somebody who's already in recovery, and you're trying to figure out the best way to support them. So there's a few different ways that you can do that. One of the things, my parents learned so much about depression and anxiety in order to be able to support me. And as I said, that exercise that my mom shared, she found that somewhere. I had no idea that existed. And she was able to use that to calm me down. And that's because of the research that she did. Sometimes it can be really difficult when, things like following a treatment plan, if your loved one is not taking all the actions. Again, it's really about being patient and being there and supportive as much as you can. One of the things that I'll say is the biggest thing that you can do is take care of yourself. I talked about caregiver burnout. It's really important as a caregiver that you take time to take care of yourself in whatever the way that works for you. You've all heard the phrase, "Put on your own oxygen mask before helping others." That's so essential when it comes to mental health, because you don't want to experience your own mental health challenges. And I'll talk about how Nami can help with that in a minute. But I want to share, there's a great video by Brene Brown on empathetic listening and how you can support somebody who comes to you when they're having a hard time.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, and climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
I love that video. If you ever have time, I highly recommend checking out Brene Brown. She has many other great videos and fantastic speaker. So I want to touch on, before I pass it over to Kelly, I want to touch a little bit on Nami, Northern Virginia, and what we do. I know you guys may know Nami Prince William. There's a Nami affiliated in Prince William too, and we offer some of the same services. So hopefully there'll be some overlap. So Nami provides education, support, and advocacy to people living with mental health conditions, as well as family members, friends, and the community. Our programs are provided at no cost to individuals. People do not need insurance to attend our programs, and there is a level of anonymity to many of our programs. We don't collect significant identifiable information, especially for our support groups that I'll talk about. Right now, the majority of our groups are virtual. We're starting to have some in person. I'm not sure if Prince William has some in person yet or not, but many of our virtual groups are open to anyone in the state. If you have the time, if your schedule works out with what we offer. So I want to give a quick overview, because maybe some of you have heard of Nami before, but haven't heard of us specifically. So Nami has sort of a three-tier model. At the national level, we have the National Nami. They're actually located in Arlington, Virginia, so close by for us. They do all of the program development. They do a lot of public media campaigns, federal advocacy work. They have a national helpline. So they do sort of on the whole country-wide scale. Then we have a state organization, Nami Virginia. They're located right here in Richmond, not here in Richmond, nearby in Richmond. They host a lot of the trainings for our programs, and they provide support to the 13 affiliates in our state. And Nami Northern Virginia is one of those affiliates, so is Nami Prince William. Nami Northern Virginia is located in Oakton, but we serve Alexandria, Arlington, Fairfax, Falls Church, and Loudoun. But as I mentioned, many of our programs being virtual are open to anyone in the state. And most of our programs we provide the on-the-ground local programs, support groups, classes, presentations. And we also have a local helpline that connects people to resources in our community. This is a list of some of the programs that Nami Northern Virginia offers. I know many of these are also offered at Nami Prince William. Some of the biggest things that we do are our support groups, our family support groups for family members, partners, spouses, anyone serving in a caregiver role of somebody with a mental health condition. and then our connection support group for individuals living with mental health conditions. As I mentioned, most of them are virtual right now, but we do have a couple going back in person. But we'll be keeping some virtual as well, because we know that it makes access to those programs easier. We have classes where people can learn about different mental health conditions, how to support themselves or a loved one, what resources are available, sort of build a coping strategy tools kit. Also connecting with people with lived experience. And all of our programs are led and facilitated by volunteers with lived experience with mental health conditions. So that's our contact information. I highly encourage you to follow us on social media. You're welcome to join our email list. That's my contact information too, if you have any questions specifically for me. But with that, I'm actually going to stop my share and turn it over to Kelly to share.
All right, my mouse decided that this is the time to not want to cooperate. Thank you, Megan. Awesome information as always. I am going to go ahead and share screen. All right. Good morning again, everyone. Again, Kelly Henderson with Formed Families Forward. I am just delighted that you, the Friday before a long weekend, gave of your time to spend with us today on this really important topic of mental health. I'm going to make some assumptions that because you are here in a session hosted by the ARC, that you may have some disability connection. So I am going to emphasize that in my talk a little bit about the comorbidity or coexistence of mental health conditions, trauma, and other types of disabilities. So hopefully that will be helpful to you. We are going to leave time for some questions at the end. I'm going to go fairly quickly through my set of slides so that we do allow some time to have some conversation. I just wanted, if you're not familiar with Formed Families Forward, share just a tiny bit about us. We are a family-led organization. Our mission is to improve outcomes across domains for children and youth with disabilities and other special needs by providing information, training, and support largely to adoptive and foster parents and kinship caregivers. And for a little bit of context, this may be new information, or if you are amongst our larger family of foster, adoptive, kinship connected folks, you already know this. About 15% of children in Virginia are actually raised in families that we would consider formed families. So it is a good number of kiddos in our state. And as you'll see, there's a large overlap with disability and special needs and mental health and trauma impact. There we go. So just a little bit more about us. We are a 501c3 organization. We do a lot of things. Perhaps you've seen us in the community. We always love joining our partners and friends, be it Nami or the ARC or the Parent Resource Center, on lots of opportunities to connect with families. I want to make a point, and I'll share more later about our support groups as Megan at Nami shared a lot about their options. There's just a wealth of options out there. Sometimes it takes a little digging, and Megan and I and our organizations are there to help you navigate that. But we want you to find the support group that's going to be right for you. We have virtual options, we have in-person options, we have groups that focus on raising children that are younger, raising children that are more young adult age, other types of caregiver support groups. So I feel confident saying there's something out there that's going to work for you if that's a need or an interest of yours. So let us help you find that perfect support group. We know peer support is a really powerful tool in supporting families, supporting yourself. I also want to mention that last bullet on this page, which is one of the new offerings that we have thanks to a grant from or through the Human Services Alliance of Prince William, is a positive parenting class. And I think I saw that one of my colleagues Nina Manganeris is joined this conversation as well. She's helping stand up this wonderful opportunity to deliver a 2-session class in June on Saturdays, and we're actually being hosted, thanks to Jan, at the Ark of Prince William. So we will physically be holding the class at the Ark of Prince William, which it sounds like most of you are familiar. And it's a class for those who are parenting younger children. So children up to about age 6 or even 8 that may need or benefit from a little bit of extra support in the parenting area. So maybe raising children with a little bit more challenging behaviors, challenging social emotional stuff. And we want to help support those parenting practices, positive parenting practices. The great thing about this class is childcare is provided, lunch is provided, and gift cards are provided to those who participate. So I think if I didn't mess this up too much, I'm going to try to paste the link in the chat box. Yes, it's going to work. So that is the direct link for that positive parenting class. So if that's not your cup of tea, but you know somebody who might benefit, or you have a connection with a preschool program, please do share that, because we are really anxious to get registrants set up for that parenting class. Just a little bit more about foster adoptive kinship families. That term kinship may be new to some of you, and I just wanted to clarify that. And about 2% of kids are in adoptive homes. And then the rest are kinship, where an extended family member has often stepped in, a grandparent often, but not only. Even a non-blood relative, like a godparent, has stepped in to take care of the child. That could be through a very formal relationship, actually like foster care, but it being delivered by a family member, or it could be very informal. It could be short-term if a parent is in rehab, or even just unavailable due to a deployment or something like that. They would be in kinship care. And then foster care, we know a lot about. I think folks are familiar with that idea, where the county agency has had to become involved with the situation because of risk of abuse and neglect or other safety concerns. About 5,300 children in Virginia at any one time are in foster care. So that's a significant number, and we are really concerned about outcomes for those kids, because they tend to not be so great, and they do tend to have mental health concerns, and certainly the impact of trauma. Those kids do skew a little bit older. More than 2/3 of children in foster care are age 7 or older, and you can see the breakdown of where they actually are. So that's who we serve. We never turn anyone away. So if you think you could benefit from our services, give us a call. We'll figure out how to either connect you to services that will help you, or enroll you in our programs. Any of our trainings are open to any family. I wanted to just share a little personal perspective, sort of what brings me to this topic of mental health. My family is formed through foster care and adoption and birth. So I have 2 of our 3 sons who joined our family through local foster care arrangements. We have finalized both of those adoptions. And I have a 3rd son who also has some challenges. And we have a plethora of diagnoses. So this is just some of the diagnoses that and labels that have been applied to the children in our family. My children now are young adults. I do have a high school student who will continue to receive services through aged the year he turns 22. So we still have our fingers in the school system activities, and then I have 2 young adults. So this is the alphabet soup that serves that has been applied to my family. So I just want to share that that's the context I'm bringing, in addition to the fact that I'm a lifelong special educator and taught children with emotional behavior disorders early in my career, and have worked in the special education field my entire professional life. So let's talk a little bit about that disability lens. This really is just a reminder, I think, of things that we know, that there is a huge overlap between mental health conditions and other types of disabilities. Again, that alphabet soup. of conditions and diagnoses. We know from smaller scale prevalence studies that the rate of mental health conditions for those with intellectual and developmental disabilities is about 2 to 3 times that higher than that for those who don't have those disability conditions. The prevalence rate for comorbidity with intellectual and developmental disabilities and mental health conditions have ranged in rates from about 14% to up to 75%. So we know that there is something extra with our kiddos and young adults with other types of disabilities, particularly developmental disabilities, such as autism spectrum disorder and other disabilities. We in the adoption world are very familiar with disabilities related to prenatal exposure to drugs and alcohol. And so we know that there is a great likelihood that an individual with a developmental disability or other disability identification may also have mental health conditions. There's just another example of a study that found basically a 50% prevalence rate psychiatric disabilities with autism spectrum disorder. So it's here. It's real. We've got that circumstance. I want to talk a little bit more now with that context about trauma. Megan did a great job introducing the topic of trauma in the foster, adoptive, and kinship world that we live and work in at Forum Families Forward. It is a reality in pretty much every interaction that we have with families, that families have with their children in their care. So I just want to introduce this because I really like this graphic. I think it does a great job of positioning what we call adverse childhood experiences. And you may have heard about ACEs. It's gotten a lot of attention in the lay press recently, certainly as a result of COVID. Has raised some of those issues again. But I like this slide, this image, because it talks about sort of those traditional ACEs, those circumstances that happen to us before the age of 18 that we know are affiliated or correlated strongly with really negative health and mental health outcomes later in life, negatively correlated. So we know that if an kiddo before the age of 18 has some of these things that are in the tree, in number one, those household characteristics of adverse childhood experience, separation of parents, incarcerated family member, abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, emotional abuse, domestic violence, witnessing a parent, particularly the mother in the family, being abused, having maternal depression in the home. All of these things in that tree are very strongly correlated with those later negative outcomes, serious cardiac issues, serious obesity issues, early death for lots of reasons, significant mental health issues. We know that's a reality. And as Megan mentioned, it's about those experiences. But those experiences alone don't necessarily account for all of the challenges that individuals face. And so I like this graphic because that number 2 talks about the community-based or environmental setting-based factors that are realities for many of us and many of our children or the families that we work with. So those are the sort of situational community-based factors. And then number 3, which we've all gotten to know very well the last 2 years, are environmental factors that also contribute to our response, our ability to respond once we have been exposed to adverse childhood experiences. And so it's really important as we think about what is trauma and what is the idea of traumatic stress, what is our experience in traumatic stress, so that we consider all 3 of these domains: what happened to us in our household, the community factors in which we live, and then what's happening in sort of the bigger environment. We could talk about this a long time, but I wanted to just give you a little taste of that. The result of those childhood traumas, the result of those exposures to adverse childhood experiences is pretty significant. We know that the impact touches all aspects of a child's life, and then again into adulthood, pretty clearly correlated with pretty negative outcomes. Even if that immediate exposure to the stressor, to the traumatic event or set of circumstances ends, those impacts stay with us until we are able to address them in some way. So these are just, again, all areas, all these domains are impacted by that early exposure to childhood trauma. I like this wheel because it I think shows how many of us instinctively respond to trauma exposure. So I'm going to just give you a second to look around those descriptions around the circle. You may actually identify some of those characteristics in yourself in the last couple of years. I think some of them describe a COVID response pretty well for some of us. But as you think about your kiddo with a developmental disability or other disabilities or those you work with, you may be able to identify some of these characteristics, those behaviors, those states, emotional, physical states that are familiar. And so I think it's really important that we recognize that those behaviors, those conditions may indeed be a response to trauma and begin to think of it as a need, perhaps in some cases a very functional, although albeit maybe not very attractive response or positive response in terms of those around them. But it may be a very functional response to that trauma for them in the immediate, because it may serve to keep them safe. We talk about fight, flight, or freeze that Megan mentioned earlier, and we can see that sort of pattern of response. The other thing I want to mention about the circle in this audience is some of those characteristics around that wheel are very common descriptions of other types of disability. So there is, again, that overlap when we see characteristics that may be attributed to a disability or may be attributed to trauma, that it is important to recognize that there may be some overlap, and understanding the need behind those behaviors is really key. Trauma is very common. I hope I don't have to convince anybody of that, especially after these last couple of years, but trauma in children is extremely common. And again, I just share these statistics. We're talking about the fact that most children under by the age of 16 have had at least 2/3 have at least had one exposure to a potentially traumatic event. And obviously the impact of those traumatic events result in lots of challenges, particularly in that school setting and home setting. The more exposure you have to these traumatic experiences or potentially traumatic experiences, the more you have, there is that cumulative effect, the more difficult the recovery is, the more challenging finding resilient strategies, and more significant problems in terms of grades, in terms of adaptive behavior we see. Again, just that intersection between trauma and disability. We talked about that intersection between mental health and disability. We see the same kinds of patterns when we're talking about individuals with developmental disabilities. And here I just want to point out that it's sort of a yin and a yang. There's sort of that cyclical relationship. Not only are individuals with developmental disabilities more likely to be exposed to trauma, and that evidence is long-standing, and we're really there's no doubt that those with developmental disabilities are at higher risk of being exposed to trauma, being exposed to violence, being victims of crime or abuse or neglect. And we just need to open a newspaper to see some of the concerning things we see about individuals being charged with crimes against individuals with disabilities. So we know that, but we also know that those who have had stressors, potentially traumatic stressors, that can also lead to then diminished capacity, diminished ability. And I think that's where it becomes a very tangled web. I wanted to just give this little analogy from a personal perspective. This is this is my bathroom floor, and I don't do much in the area of beauty regime, but I do have the opportunity to occasionally get a pedicure, and I had a bottle of nail polish sitting on our vanity top, and I knocked it over in my rush to get through a shower, and there it spilled all over the floor. And I immediately got my chemical cleaners and started to wipe up the mess, and got it off some of the tile and was able to get it off of some of the vanity drawer. But as you can see, some of that potent color sort of sunk in, and it remains. And so I think the pervasive impact of trauma, particularly on our individuals with disabilities, or any individual, but particularly our children with disabilities, the reality is that that stain is going to remain. We've done a lot of, you can take a lot of steps, we can do a lot of interventions, but there's something very pervasive about the impact of trauma. And so it forces us to change the way we engage, right? Maybe I don't let people into my bathroom. Maybe I throw a rug over it. Maybe I, add polish to the entire grouting so that it all matches. There are things that I do to accommodate and treat that current state as a way of living, as a way of work from here on. And so I guess I just want to raise that we can talk about interventions, and Megan talked a lot about interventions. I'm going to share some strategies, but there's truly a really pervasive impact that we have to recognize and change our own behavior and our own response to some of the needs to recognize that and work within that reality. What are some of those things in terms of trauma sensitive practices? So I try to just really list out some really basic things that we could do regardless of the setting, whether it's home or school or in the community, that are really trauma sensitive practices that work for all, whether it's we're talking about a kid or an adult or our spouse. We want to always prioritize the relationship. So there's a phrase in trauma-informed care about connecting before correcting, and this applies obviously in schools a great deal. We want to have that basis for the relationship so that then we can work towards resiliency and work towards correcting challenging habits, work towards creating that menu of coping strategies. So relationship is really key regardless of your setting. Transparency and trust. I'm not sure why some of these are darker gray and some are black. I apologize for that. If you're a color person, transparency and trust, really, really important. And that obviously is grounded in that relationship, but we always need to treat even our individuals with more significant disabilities with the respect, answer their questions honestly, obviously in a developmentally appropriate way, but make sure that we are always honest about what happened to them, why we responded in a certain way, and really be honest about our decisions around and with them. Safe spaces, really key. We talk a lot about having break passes and options for kiddos in schools that are feeling those stressors, recognizing that they may need a break, finding places that are going to be safe for them, pre-establishing those safe places. These next two bullets are very familiar to all of us in the disability field, the idea of self-advocacy and helping find opportunities for shared decision-making, goal setting. I tried to find quickly a picture of a student-led IEP, and you would be surprised how hard it is to find that. So that may be sadly telling. But in this upper picture, I was just a reminder that encouraging youth, even younger children, to take a lead role in their IEP or other decision-making roles, teams, is really, really key to this idea of letting our history be real, but also taking opportunities where they come to find those strengths and build opportunities, build skills for individuals to take control, because they may have been victims in the past, but we need to find opportunities for them to take a strength-based lead. And that strength-based lens is really, really key. I also have fidgets there because that, I guess, related to safe spaces. We always want to think about what, particularly for our individuals with more significant disabilities or sensory needs, that we want to have opportunities for them to find safety in just being in a space. And sometimes sensory toys and sensory fidgets can be helpful there. Megan mentioned COVID. I did want to just share a couple of thoughts on COVID because it is the elephant in the living room. We are dealing with that continually, continuing this journey. And I wanted to make a mention of this advisory that was shared by the Surgeon General's last last year. This is a quote that I thought was really powerful, that it, assuming we're making progress as we are in fighting the physical implications of the pandemic, of the virus. It would be a tragedy to beat back one public health crisis only to allow another to grow in its place. Mental health challenges in children, adolescents, and young adults are real, but they are widespread. And most importantly, and this is the takeaway, they are treatable and often preventable. And I just thought that was a really good, this is an opportunity, right? This is a critical point in our history to recognize those mental health stressors that have been made writ large with COVID. We know that there's an increase in those symptoms related to depression and anxiety. We know that negative behaviors, things that look like ADHD, perhaps, particularly if you're a school folks, may have seen some of these increases in behaviors during and since COVID. We know that there's particularly an increase with our young girls and young women in terms of ED visits for suspected suicide attempts. And then more close to home, I was able to find some Fairfax County data that actually is directly from high school and middle school students reporting significantly more elevated stress levels. So we know this is a reality. We know that there's a disproportionate impact of COVID on disability. We know that services have been lacking, access to services have been jeopardized. We know that deterioration of mental health conditions have been a reality for some of us. So where do we go? Again, I think very similar to what Megan said, we want to always resist and confront that stigma. In some circles, I know this is an evolving thing, that Mental Health Awareness Month has actually been turned into Mental Health Acceptance Month, the idea that we need to get past just being aware, but actually accepting our reality and taking steps and actions. So we want to improve access to mental health services. We want to create infrastructures that support behavioral health expertise with those co-occurring developmental disabilities and other disabilities. And I think that is a real challenge, even in our region, where generally we have lots of providers and we have lots of resources and we have great county agencies. We still lack that capacity to serve those with developmental disabilities and significant mental health conditions. Trauma sensitive inclusive service systems, I think I covered that previously. And then family and youth engagement opportunities. It is so key to engage families in treatment, to find their strengths, to build on the strengths that families bring, as well as those that youth bring. And then peer supports. And again, Megan really talked about the importance of peer supports, both for family members, caregivers, and for the youth themselves. Just a quick plug for our resource directory. It is a fabulous tool if you're in Northern Virginia, all kinds of resources, private providers, county agencies. You're able to search by jurisdiction, you're able to search by trauma expertise, and you're able to search by insurance, including Medicaid. So it is a really valuable tool. Tons and tons of resources. You can just access it at a click of a button. So you just go to our website and there's actually very clear how to get to our resource directory. We do have support groups of our own at Formed Families Forward. We have Formed Families Together, which is a peer-led support group for foster adoptive parents and kinship caregivers. So unlike our trainings, which are open to everybody, this group is for foster adoptive and kinship parents, caregivers. We have a virtual option once a month, and we have a in-person option once a month in Fairfax. So if you are one of those families or know a family that could benefit, these are ongoing groups, open enrollment, really supportive folks living this same, walking the same path. And then we do have a youth peer support group. We do that during the school year. So we've concluded the one for 21-22. We are restructuring that group for next year, but we will be serving youth and young adults, and we will likely be doing that in person. That is definitely the way that youth prefer to meet, and that's for 14 to 22-year-olds, and probably will be in the Fairfax area. But if it is something that you think your youth or youth you work with could benefit from, let us know. And as soon as we make those changes and restructure our approach for fall, we will let everyone know. Some other resources I mentioned, we have some trauma resources. We have some great videos if trauma is new to you or those that you work with. It could benefit some really basic but good videos. We have a set of 3: understanding trauma, addressing trauma, and building trauma sensitive schools. We have a trauma resources webpage. We have a mental health resources webpage. That's my information. We have all kinds of social media handles. We would love to have you join us on Facebook and Instagram. We do share our information, but we also share information from the Parent Resource Center, from the ARC, from Nami. So we really do try to get information out to families who could benefit. And I am going to stop and see if we have any questions or conversation.
Yeah, please enter your questions in the chat, or you can turn your microphone on if you would like. Soraya, did you have a question? Okay. Anyone else? Oh, come on, people. So surely someone has a question. I personally appreciated your comment, Kelly, about how people always get blamed for these traumatic events. That everybody blames it on mental illness, and I think that gives mental illness a bad name, so to speak. You know, it just infuriates me. There is a question: do you have programs that cater to minority populations? And is this for NAMI or for Form Families Forward? Or both?
I'll let Megan go first and I'll address it, and hopefully we'll, oh, there we go, both.
Okay.
Sure. So this is something that NAMI Northern Virginia is in the process of working on. This as a goal for this year. Most of our programs right now are pretty broad and open to anyone. We're hoping to create some support groups specifically for minority groups. We're hoping that by the end of this year, we can have a Spanish language support group. I know NAMI Prince William does currently have a Spanish language support group, which is great. One thing that we do outside of our sort of signature programs, we obviously share a lot of resources on social media, but we also host monthly meetings once a month where we bring in guest speakers. And we will have, I don't think we have it finalized yet, but July is Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. So we'll definitely have some speakers for that and some events going on there. But I highly encourage you. One of the things is we're entirely volunteer led. So if we have, volunteers who are interested in starting a support group or leading a class specifically for different groups, that's our goal is to be able to do that very soon.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have anything dedicated to minority populations as such. We do, because of our foster, adoptive, and kinship lens, we do have a lot of multiracial families in our sort of collective. So we have done some sessions that speak to that issue of multiracial families and sort of talk about some of the mental health and concerns and strategies that may come along with a child who is being raised in a home that is whose race does not match theirs, race or culture does not match theirs. And so we have addressed that issue to some degree, but in terms of mental health services like the support groups, they're open to all, but we have not had a special sort of focus on that. We do have in our directory a number of providers, private providers, like the Multicultural Center, JESSA, and others that do have a specialty in that area and really work to make sure that they have therapists and a skill set that meet whether it be language or other cultural factors that are more well suited. So look in our directory if nothing else.
Do you have positions available in your programs?
I'll mention we always are happy to take volunteers. As I mentioned, all of our programs are volunteer led. They're led by volunteers with lived experience, either as a family member or somebody serving in a caregiver role or an individual living with a mental health condition. And if you want to use your experience to support others, please contact us. Yes, we always can always use more volunteers.
And we don't have any open positions right now on regular staff, but we often do have sort of short-term contract positions for facilitators of classes, childcare, all kinds of things that they're not permanent positions, and they're not particularly lucrative, but we do have opportunities. So if that's something that you might be interested in, helping with childcare, supporting a class, a youth class, or a parenting class, just send me your information, and we'll see what we might be able to.
And I can say at the ARC, we always have openings because we hire a number of direct support professionals, particularly in our adults with developmental disabilities, our group homes. And, we had 11% pay increase last year that we're praying that it will continue. The state helped out, gave us, a big bump with that. So we're getting there with salaries, but if you have the heart to do it, please contact our agency or look on our website, which is arcgpw.org, and go under careers. There are a number of positions there.
Yeah,
Now,
we hear.
I'll ask a quick question. Kelly and Megan, will you share your slides with me later so that I can do it in PDF and then I can send it out, to people? I'd appreciate that, because I will send out the link to the recording and a copy of the slides.
Will do.
Probably early next week.
Will do. And I'll just say, on the staffing side, from a family perspective, we keep hearing about serious staff shortages across service systems, counseling, schools, vocational rehab, disability services, waiver services. So if this is a passion of yours and you bring a trauma-informed lens and a compassion and empathy for those with mental health conditions or other disabilities and conditions, I implore you to join the field. Yes. Because we need good people. We really need good people. And
you drive by our offices, we have a huge sign outside. We are hiring, always. It's very fulfilling. It is not necessarily financially fulfilling as much as it is. It reaches your heart. I wouldn't have stayed here 26 years if it didn't, So, because I started out as a high school English teacher. So that was many years ago. Any other questions? Well, Kelly and Megan, thank you so much. And Rhonda, I'll be in touch soon. I'm compiling the list of workshops that we had this year for you. So thank you, everybody, for attending. And yes, Soraya, I'll see you next week at yoga, because we do offer chair yoga almost every week. Through the end of June, it will be on Wednesdays at 10 a.m. Anybody is welcome. And starting in July, it will be on Thursday mornings at 9:30. And we have dates through September. It's not every week during the summer. But Tia Marsili from ARC of Northern Virginia teaches the classes, for us, and she does a great job. They're also all available on our YouTube channel, which is the ARC of Greater Prince William. We have all our chair yoga recordings there, as well as many workshops. So check us out, check out our website. And yes, the yoga is a good coping strategy. It calms me. That's how I could get to sleep many nights, is through the breathing, so thank you, everybody. Anything else before we stop? Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.